Everything has to be cleaned in the gold room. I can't do that. I just can't. Why have a third planet if you can't keep it clean?
In that eruption, the narrative shifted. No longer was Gold Rush simply about ounces, pay dirt, and records. It became a moral test, a question to every viewer, every fan, every producer. What will you ask a man to give away before you call it enough? The glamour of gold, the thrill of cleanouts, and the excitement of milestones paled in comparison to the human toll that had been quietly mounting for years. Then came the resignation. Not whispered, not negotiated behind closed doors, not edited for suspense, declared live. Chris Doumitt walked away from the claim, from the cameras, from the audience that had watched him for seasons, leaving behind the empire he had helped build and the machinery he had kept running. The steady heartbeat of Parker's operation went silent, leaving echoes of labor, sacrifice, and unspoken stories in its wake. The fallout was immediate. Fans flooded forums and social media. Headlines exploded across entertainment and mining news alike. Chris Doumitt erupts and resigns on live TV after something crazy Gold Rush Season 15. For a moment, the world paused. It wasn't about ounces anymore. It was about a man's endurance, a crew's reality, and the cost of chasing gold at any price. For Chris, the act was both liberation and reckoning. Years of sacrifice, of quiet labor behind the scenes, had culminated in this singular moment of truth. And for Parker, for the crew, and for the fans, it was a stark reminder. Gold is heavy, but loyalty and humanity weigh even more. As the dust settled, questions lingered. How would Parker rebuild? Could the claim continue without its anchor? And what price would anyone pay next for glory in the Klondike? Behind every ounce of gold lies a human story. The Klondike rewards the brave, but it never forgets the cost. Subscribe now to follow every untold moment of Gold Rush Season 15 and beyond. The Gold Rush world has been rocked to its core. For over a decade, Chris Doumitt was the steady hand on Parker Schnabel's crew, trusted, respected, and rarely in the spotlight. But everything changed in one shocking moment that no one saw coming. During a tense Season 15 broadcast, Chris Doumitt erupts and resigns on live TV after something crazy Gold Rush Season 15. He didn't just speak up, he erupted. And what followed wasn't frustration. It was a resignation. Live. On air. In front of millions of stunned viewers. This wasn't a scripted stunt. It was raw, real, and explosive. As the dust settled, fans were left asking, what drove one of the most loyal miners in Gold Rush history to walk away so publicly? Was it the relentless pressure of Klondike gold, the toll on his health and family, or something deeper, something even the producers didn't want us to see? In this video, we're uncovering exactly what happened, the hidden buildup behind the cameras, and what Chris's shocking exit means for Parker, the crew, and the future of Gold Rush. Season 15 of Gold Rush was about to begin, and the Klondike was alive with anticipation. Parker Schnabel was ready to push his operation harder than ever. Rick Ness and the Beard family were plotting their own paths to fortune. Every miner knew the stakes. The pay dirt was unforgiving, the machines relentless, and the winter merciless. But amidst all the planning and preparation, one name drew quiet attention: Chris Doumitt. Chris wasn't born into mining. A carpenter by trade, he had come north to build cabins, but the Klondike had other plans. Over time, he learned the subtle art of gold recovery, sluice box operation, black sand analysis, and the painstaking precision required to capture every last speck. What started as a temporary job turned into a calling. Over seasons, Chris became Parker Schnabel's anchor, the calm, methodical heartbeat keeping plants alive, ounces flowing, and the crew moving efficiently. Fans rarely noticed him, but anyone who worked alongside Chris knew the truth. Without him, Parker's empire would falter. By season 15, Parker's operation had grown into one of the largest privately run mining empires in the Klondike. At one point, 3 wash plants, Big Red, Rock Sand, and Bob's Setup, roared simultaneously, processing thousands of yards of pay dirt every single day. It wasn't just mining, it was industrial warfare against the earth itself. Mud flew under floodlights as steel clashed, engines screamed, and the gold room thickened with the scent of sweat, oil, and diesel. Every breath carried iron, every hour demanded more. Amid this chaos moved Chris Doumitt with quiet precision. The viewers had long admired his easy smile, quick jokes, and tireless work ethic. He wasn't a showman. If Parker's claim was a living machine, Chris was its heartbeat. His eyes scanned sluice boxes like a surgeon checking vitals, hands brushing through black sand with the practiced skill of a craftsman who had lived this grind longer than most could endure. But season 15 revealed something different. The cameras began catching subtle cracks, his hands trembling slightly, his jokes thinning, his shoulders heavier. Mining doesn't just take from the ground. It takes from the men who dig it. Dawson's bitter winds cut deeper than steel, gnawing through clothing and morale alike. Every hour chipped away at muscle, bone, and spirit. For Chris, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with Parker since the early days, this wasn't just another season. This was the breaking point. Behind the scenes, the pressure escalated. Parker's empire demanded more dirt, more ounces, more risk. Big Red thundered day and night. Rock Sand groaned under stress, and Bob's Setup strained with every load. Every breakdown added to the tension. For most men, it was the cost of the job. For Chris, it was the cost of loyalty. The breaking point didn't come during a gold weigh or a pay cut. It came live, in front of cameras that never stopped rolling. Chris's voice, raw and strained, rose above the roar of engines. Words no one expected, words no one thought he'd ever say. And then, the moment no one believed possible, resignation, spoken out loud in front of millions of viewers. The gold rush world froze. Forums exploded, social media lit up, headlines spread. Chris Doumitt walks away. Questions echoed louder than the roar of the claim itself. Was it the relentless pressure of Parker's empire? Years of exhaustion and frostbitten hands? Or something deeper, a truth that the cameras were never meant to capture? Season 15 didn't just uncover gold. It uncovered a man's breaking point. For the first time in Gold Rush history, the cameras weren't just documenting the work. They were capturing a moral test, a human story of loyalty, limits, and cost. Chris Doumitt's eruption wasn't about the ounces. It was about the human toll behind every haul, every record, every ambitious goal. And as the dust settled, the future of Parker's crew, and of Gold Rush itself, would never be the same. And as the claim roared to life, the question on everyone's mind was clear. How long could one man carry the weight of Parker Schnabel's empire before it all came crashing down? 10,000 ounces. To most miners, the number was a fantasy, unreachable, unrealistic, absurd. But to Parker Schnabel, it was more than a dream. It was a declaration. He didn't whisper it in quiet moments. He carved it into the season's DNA. Every meeting, every radio call, every equipment purchase orbited around those 3 words, 10,000 ounces. At first, the crew laughed nervously. They'd seen Parker push before, chase records, gamble on bold moves, and take risks other miners wouldn't touch. But this time was different. This wasn't just about topping last year's totals. This was about proving to the world and to himself that his empire could outpace history. The goal spread like wildfire. Whiteboards, fuel logs, monitors in the office trailer, everything displayed projections. Yardage, fuel, labor costs. On paper, it promised glory. In reality, it demanded bodies. To reach it meant more leases, bigger plants, longer hours. Big Red thundered day and night. Rock Sand groaned under stress. Bob's setup strained with every load. Each machine became a soldier in Parker's war for gold, and every man was expected to serve without question. Sleep became optional. Meals were fuel stops. Weekends disappeared. Mining was no longer a job, it was a siege. And the siege had casualties. Hoses burst like arteries. Bearings seized. Pumps failed under the weight of endless hours. Every breakdown stole time. Every lost hour felt like a betrayal of the 10,000-ounce dream. Parker had no patience, no excuses. The goal was a commandment. Break it, and you broke faith with the mission. Chris Doumitt felt it most of all. For years, he had been Parker's quiet constant, the man who didn't complain, who fixed what needed fixing, who kept the plants alive. But under the glare of Season 15, the number pressed down like an invisible weight. 10,000 ounces wasn't just a target, it was an anvil on his spine. Every time he bent over a sluice box, brushed black sand from the riffles, the number ticked in his head like a metronome. 10,000. 10,000. 10,000. The goal turned men into machines, stripping away individuality, reducing the crew to numbers on a spreadsheet. Yardage dug, hours worked, ounces produced, schedules became chains, chains that bind but also cut. The tighter they pulled, the more strain spread through the crew. Chris, the heartbeat of Parker's empire, was caught in the center. Even the strongest chains break when pulled too tight. At first, the cracks were subtle. A hesitation at cleanup, a sigh at a jammed sluice, a grimace at a stubborn pump. But over days, the fissures grew, like frost creeping over frozen dirt. Hands that once moved with surgical precision trembled. Humor that had kept the crew's morale intact grew thin. Other miners noticed. The calm, reliable Chris was no longer invincible. Meanwhile, the Klondike's harshness intensified. Bitter winds cut through layers of clothing. Frost hardened mud into stone, and every machine groaned under overuse. Every breakdown, every delay, became a visible weight pressing on Chris and the crew. And the cameras, always rolling, didn't miss it. Every twitch, hesitation, flash of frustration was captured for the world to see. The unseen costs, the fatigue, worry, and emotional toll were now visible in stark detail. Chris, the heart of the operation, was beginning to crack, and those cracks weren't confined to him. They threatened to ripple through the entire claim. And while the world watched the gold pour in, what no one saw, and what even the cameras couldn't fully capture, was the toll it was taking on the men who made it possible. Chris Doumitt hadn't been born into mining. His hands were built for wood, not black sand, for hammers, not sluice boxes. He had come north as a carpenter, following work to the Klondike to build cabins for miners and prospectors. But somewhere along the way, he stayed. What started as a temporary job turned into a calling, a journey that would see him transform from a tradesman into the cornerstone of Parker Schnabel's empire. He learned the intricacies of mining in silence, mastering sluices, understanding gold chemistry, and perfecting the quiet art of recovery. Over seasons, Chris became the man who bridged chaos and order, the steady hand in the gold room, the man who could catch ounces before they vanished down a spigot, who knew when a riffle was clogged before a single grain was lost. He patched plants at midnight, calmed crews at dawn, and kept Parker's numbers honest. The empire ran because of him, and yet fans rarely noticed. To the audience, he was the background, the man behind the scenes, a dependable presence in a world that loved drama more than diligence. But the cost was invisible, unrecorded in episodes or charts. Nights spent away from family, long hours in freezing temperatures, hips stiff from frost and fatigue, none of it appeared on screen. The hidden ledger of sacrifice was all Chris carried silently, a balance sheet of exhaustion and loyalty that grew heavier with every ounce Parker demanded. Each season, each goal, each record-setting week added weight. It was a weight he bore quietly, until the demands finally grew teeth. As the pressure mounted, even the smallest tasks began to feel monumental. Repaired pumps became urgent crises. Clogged sluices became moral tests. The crew looked to Chris to solve problems before they escalated. The plants roared, engines screamed, and mud flew under floodlights, but Chris was expected to remain the calm center. Every mistake, every delay, every ounce of pay dirt lost reflected not just on production, but on his reputation, his very identity within the team. He was no longer just a carpenter or a crewman. He was the glue holding an empire together. And yet, the more essential he became, the more isolated he felt. His work was indispensable, but his humanity invisible. The Klondike's cold, harsh winters were only half the battle. The rest was mental, emotional, and relentless. Every day was a test of endurance, every hour a negotiation with fatigue, every ounce extracted a negotiation with his own limits. Chris had built more than cabins. He had built a backbone, a foundation on which Parker's empire depended. But foundations can crack under too much weight. And as the season pressed on, it became clear. The same man who had quietly held everything together for years was being pushed to a breaking point. And behind the scenes, pressure wasn't just measured in ounces or equipment failures. It was measured in loyalty, endurance, and the quiet fractures no camera could fully capture. The cameras show triumph. They capture massive cleanouts, glimmering pay dirt, and Parker's triumphant grin as Big Red devours yet another yard of frozen Klondike dirt. But what the audience rarely sees, the calculus behind every ounce, is exhaustion. The real story happens off camera. Whispers threaded through the camp like smoke. We're burning men out. Parker's pushing too hard? Who's watching the watchers? Casual remarks at first, then recurring concerns. Crew members noticed the same signs. Pale faces, tremors in hands, shoulders slumping under invisible weight. Production notes got tighter. Cutaways were lengthened. Takes that revealed frustration or fatigue were binned, sanitized for prime time. And while the cameras painted heroism, the truth behind the lens smelled of diesel, sweat, and tension. Rumors circulated that network executives demanded more episodes, more drama, and higher yields. Every ounce extracted, every breakdown filmed, had stakes beyond the claim itself. It was no longer just mining. It was performance, for ratings, for contracts, for reputations. Crew members traded nervous glances in the mess tent, silently weighing loyalty against personal limits. When Tatiana was suggested as a backup in the gold room, the fragile equilibrium nearly snapped. Mitch and Tyson bristled. Parker hesitated, torn between the efficiency of an extra set of hands and the loyalty of his seasoned crew. And Chris felt cornered. He had always solved problems quietly, patched plants at midnight, and mediated tensions before they escalated. But now, every decision, every added responsibility felt like a weight pressing against the breaking point of his endurance. Behind the scenes, stress accumulated like layers of ice. Machines roared non-stop. Pay dirt piles grew higher. Schedules stretched beyond reason. And yet, no one was allowed to falter in front of the cameras. Every minor failure was a moral test. Every argument was smoothed over for the narrative. Even the smallest sign of human strain risked being edited out, restructured, or erased. Chris carried the pressure silently, a ledger of fatigue, loyalty, and personal sacrifice that no spreadsheet could measure. His hands, once unshakable, now bore the tremors of long nights and relentless expectations. His humor thinned, his patience wore, and even the men he had guided for years sensed the tension rising. This was the hidden cost of Season 15, the relentless push for gold and ratings, the invisible chains binding men to the claim, the subtle fractures that no camera could capture until they became impossible to hide. And when those fractures widened, the man who had quietly held the claim together for years would finally confront the pressure in a way the world would never forget. Years in the Klondike leave marks far deeper than frostbite. For Chris Doumitt, the sacrifices were written not on paper, but into his very bones. Missed birthdays, dinners skipped, children tucked into bed without a father to read the story, all traded for the endless churn of conveyor belts, the roar of Big Red, and the grind of pay dirt. Nights blurred into mornings and mornings into evenings, each marked by the relentless tick of production and the weight of expectations. Chris had become more than a miner. He was the guardian of ounces, a craftsman of recovery. Every speck of gold he saved was painstakingly coaxed from black sand, a tiny victory that meant thousands of dollars, yet rarely earned applause. Fans called him reliable. Inside the camp, he was the quiet ledger of every ounce extracted, every machine kept alive, every morale crisis quietly diffused. The gold room had become his chapel, the sluice boxes his scripture. Chris knew the claims like the back of his hands, every riffle, every spigot, every worn corner where gold liked to hide. He read pay dirt like a diary, each layer revealing more than minerals. It revealed the physical and emotional cost of the chase. And the cost was accumulating. His hands bore tremors from years of repetitive strain. Frost-bitten fingers stiffened painfully under icy waters. Shoulders, hips, and knees creaked like the old plants he repaired nightly. His patience, once endless, frayed under the weight of young operators learning, under pressure and mistakes that cost pay dirt and time. Chris had always absorbed the tension quietly, deflecting it from others, shielding Parker's operation from the human cost. But even the strongest shields crack under relentless strain. Sacrifice, in this context, was invisible. Cameras never lingered on the cold that gnawed through jackets, or the evenings spent alone counting ounces instead of stories. Success was measured in ounces, records, and cleanouts, not in the toll it took on the man holding it all together. Yet each step, each day, each season carved deeper lines into Chris's body and spirit. The irony was brutal. The man who ensured the claim ran like a well-oiled machine, whose diligence kept Parker's empire climbing, was also the one paying the steepest price. He had built more than an empire. He had built the very foundation of the operation. And yet, foundations, no matter how strong, are not invincible. Every ounce recovered, every plant patched, every crisis smoothed over, became another link in a chain that bound Chris to his duty even as it pulled him closer to the breaking point. The world outside saw gold, camaraderie, and victory. Inside the camp, they witnessed exhaustion, frustration, and silent endurance that could not be aired without consequence. And so, the ledger of Chris Doumitt's life in the Klondike continued to grow, line by line, ounce by ounce. Each victory carried a cost, each cleanout a personal debt, until the sum of those sacrifices began to weigh more than any man could endure. And as the strain mounted, the man who had quietly carried Parker's claim for years would soon reach the limit, and the eruption the world had only whispered about would finally take place. Something finally snapped, not with a headline, not with a whispered complaint, but with a raw human yell that cut through the roar of the gold room. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't staged. It was the sound of a man pushed beyond the edge of endurance. Chris Doumitt, the calm, reliable heartbeat of Parker Schnabel's empire, let the weight of seasons, targets, and unseen sacrifices explode in one irrepressible moment. The cameras caught every second. Chris's voice, hoarse with exhaustion, pierced the static of engines and floodlights. He shouted about the impossible, about being tasked to keep 3 plants from bleeding gold while the frost gnawed at his fingers, while nights blurred into mornings cleaning sluice boxes until his hands ached and bled. He spoke not as a miner but as a man who had given every ounce of himself, only to realize that loyalty, even to Parker, had limits. Parker froze. The crew went silent, stunned. Mitch, Tyson, and the others looked on as the man who had held them together for years shattered the invisible barrier between production and humanity. The roar of Big Red and Rock Sand faded beneath the intensity of Chris's words. Producers scrambled, network cutaways stuttered, and yet it was too late. The live mic had already carried the truth across homes, phones, and screens worldwide. Even the most loyal can break.